the robotics and AI revolution. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, anecdotally, my experience with it, my path through it, and try to convey a very key message that will hopefully become apparent by the time I get to the end. It's always important to go back in time and see where this started. Let's go back 40 years. The first sort of modern revolution, the digital revolution, computation was at the heart of it. But the input to it was still people, and the output was people. People would interpret the results. People would type things in. The killer apps were things like Excel and word processors. Fast forward 20, 30 years, we saw the big data revolution still going on now, where the input process, instead of it just being people, was augmented by having data, automated way of getting data and feeding it to computation. But the interpretation was still done by people, looking at the results and making decisions based on that. Where we are right now is an interesting point in time where we still have those things, although computation now can be the size of your fingernail to server farms. Distributed sensing, you can sense almost anything, anywhere. Same thing for actuation. And you can interact with the physical world and you can close the loop. This is really, it's never been like this before in history. This is a very unique time for us to have this capability. One of the things that people don't think about, though, is what is the bottleneck to widespread adoption, which obviously is of interest to folks like yourselves that want to invest in the space. And that is, the key bottleneck is robustness and reliability. All right? And this is something that folks don't often think about. They just look at the latest video and think, oh, great, this is just around the corner. Well, that just isn't the case because of these issues. So my first experience with commercialization was Kiva Systems. This is a company that I started with Mick and Pete in 2003. We were called Distrobot when we started the company. We changed the name about a year later because basically we were told that's a very bad name to have in the space. It has the word robot in it. If you want somebody to take you seriously, you got to change your name. So we changed it to Kiva Systems. 8 years later, roughly 300 people. Amazon bought us. A lot of people were scratching their heads in 2012. Why would Amazon buy this company? In 2015, Kiva System was rebranded and is now Amazon Robotics. Amazon has more than 100,000 of these mobile robots in their distribution facilities everywhere, and you can see the video there of the kind of things that our robots do. What allowed Kiva to happen was the fact that we had thousands of mobile robots running fully autonomously. Nobody was obviously controlling them, and they were not breaking down. The mean time between failure of mobile robots when we started Kiva was 24 hours. We had a business model where we wanted to have thousands of them running 24/7. Clearly, you can't have 1,000 of these things breaking down. It's just not economically viable. We had to come up with new architectures, new designs, and the algorithms to allow these things to basically run all the time. In 2008, about 5 years into Kiva, the part that I was responsible for, the robotics part, was well established and was more about scaling the business. So I decided to go back into academia. I was a professor professor back when I moved to Switzerland. And I started to do research on things that I had put on hold to do Kiva, which was flying machines, drones. So these are some of the things that we've been doing in Switzerland the last 10 years. What we do in terms of research is try to push the boundary of what these autonomous systems can do. When I wear my university professor hat on, I don't care about applications. I just care about pushing the boundary. And of course, if I start a company, then I really care about what's the problem that I'm solving, how do I bring value to our clients. Back to drones, what can you use them for? These are things that people think about. This is where the market currently is, and it's a multi-billion-dollar market already. Inspection, agriculture, the key idea there is to sense things. Put drones with cameras or other sensors in hard-to-reach places. Photography and film, a lot of it is hobbyists, but also professional productions. And package delivery, what you heard from Google and Amazon, the idea here of moving packages, especially for the last mile, but also for things like blood samples or things that have a high value to weight ratio. But there's other things that you can use the technology for. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, I'm going to show you a little video here of what my company, Verity, does. It's an application of drones that people don't really think too much about. For us, it's an interesting way to push the boundary of what you can do with this technology. So, the company's 50 people, based in Switzerland. Most of them are folks with advanced degrees. We've done some very high-profile events. We're currently on tour with Metallica. We've done the Knicks pregame show, Madison Square Garden, last year. We were on Broadway with Cirque du Soleil. We did 400 shows. I'll say a little bit more about that later, and other events. What's interesting about live events is that it's outside of it being an interesting vertical for robotics and AI that is greatly unexplored, not just for drones, but any sort of automation and intelligence, it's a great incubator to test this technology. We have over 40,000 flights flying over people. This is what we've been able to do. Our systems are operated, the one on Broadway is operated by the carpenter. That's the name for the folks that run the automation equipment on Broadway. 400 shows, fully autonomous drones operated by their folks. In Metallica, it's the roadies, the folks that are running the system are not us, right? So we're learning huge amounts how to interface people to these types of systems and learning a lot to improve what these things can do. And as was mentioned earlier, we're also on tour with Drake at the moment. What's interesting about this technology is it can be used for other things besides live event, and this is the whole incubator aspect of the technology. And here's one way in which you could use them. We've developed this proprietary technology that allows an unlimited number of objects to localize themselves in space, and we've created these very safe and reliable small drones that can use that technology. And you can use them in any indoor space, because you don't have to worry about the elements, to do things like data collection, inspection, and monitoring. So here you see an application where they could fly around a warehouse, do things like read barcodes, to make sure that things are where they're supposed to be. These things are extremely small and light, right? So you don't have to worry about safety. They don't make very much noise. They're autonomous. They're not being controlled by a human being. There's a mission planner that figures out where they need to go and what they need to do. They can do things like, go ahead and charge, take off, and continue the mission. So this is an interesting application of the technology for indoor spaces. And then there's the whole safety aspect of it. So we did 400 shows on Broadway with our drones. And stuff like this did not happen, okay? This would have been catastrophic if this was from about 2 years ago. We did 400 shows on Broadway flying over performers, again, fully autonomous. And the reason that we were comfortable doing that was because of this amazing technology that we developed to make vehicles robust to any single point of failure. Why is that important? Well, that's one example there. Here you see another scenario. This drone is actually dropping candy. Okay, and it hits this is from last year. I mean, fortunately, no one has been killed yet, but if we don't start making these drones much more safe and reliable, it's just a matter of time, especially once you have thousands or millions of them, if you believe in last mile delivery applications. So again, why is it that we felt comfortable flying on Broadway with our drones that weighed over 2 pounds? It's because of this fail-safe technology that we developed. We've created some very interesting algorithms that allow these drones to operate in spite of failures. Here you see Flavio take a huge 2x4 and shove it into our vehicle, and the vehicle can recover from that event and land. Here you see it in slow motion. This technology allows anything to fail. motors, propellers, batteries, electronics, you name it, this thing can still fly. So it's an interesting business model of using live events as an incubator to develop this technology, and now we're actively licensing this technology, and hopefully it will find its way in every single drone that you find, make them much safer and reliable. I'm going to close off here with the few minutes that I have remaining to kind of emphasize, even though it seems, that I've been at the center of a lot of these innovations, the reality is the future is impossible to predict. It's very difficult to figure out what is going to be a winner and what is going to be a loser. And I have 3 anecdotes to kind of highlight this point. So the first is with Kiva. Kiva was bought by Amazon in 2012. It's now Amazon Robotics. A lot of folks it was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of companies to realize that robotics has this huge potential and that we really need to start investing in it. The anecdote I want to say about it is that in 2008, in February, Mick and I went for lunch, and we talked about whether we should do a fundraise. We were close to cash flow positive. We had a great pipeline. Everything looked great. So there really was no reason for us to take money. We had lunch and we thought about it. We said, yeah, actually we can get very good valuation and you never know what's going to happen. And of course, we all know what happened in 2008. We had just finished our fundraising, so we were actually able to ride that out. If that lunch conversation had gone differently, Kiva probably would not have remained a viable business and things would have been very, very different. Just this very little thing is impossible to predict. Right? Another most recent example is Rethink Robotics. The pioneer in collaborative robotics, they just shut down. And what went wrong? Amazing pedigree. Rod Brooks, one of the founders of the first real consumer robotics company, iRobot, MIT professor, visionary. Great team, great premise, the whole collaborative robotics. The MIT Technology Review article really says it. It's really hard to be successful in this space. And I'm sure that people will go back and say, well, the reason they failed is because of this and this and that. But all those decisions, it's very hard to predict ahead of time what these things, what's going to pan out and what's not. And the last one is, we hear about artificial intelligence all the time. We had some recent breakthroughs. AI beating the AlphaGo master, Lee Sedol, in something that people didn't think was going to happen for a long, long time. Go is much, much more complex in terms of strategies than chess. So it's a very different thing to make an AI that could beat someone in this game. We see on the right-hand side there the huge advances that have been made on image classification. And a lot of this is enabled by neural nets. The thing is, if you go back to the 90s when I was a graduate student, if you told anybody that you were working on neural nets, you were a second-class citizen, right? It was looked down upon. You're working on neural nets died twice. Once was in the 60s and 70s, and it died again in the 90s. No one serious was doing research in neural nets. And if you had told someone from that time, neural nets are going to be huge in 20 years, they would just, you just laugh at you, right? No one predicted this, right? Except for the few diehards that kept doing research in the area, but those folks were discounted, right? No one really predicted this, the impact that this would have. There's a lot of reasons why. I'm not going to get into any of them. The thing is, it is impossible to predict. So to conclude, what's the lesson here? The lesson here is that you've got to be diversified. The theme of robotics and AI, I think, has huge potential in the medium to long term, and in the short term, of course, but specifically in the medium to long term. But it's very difficult to point to any companies that are going to be winners and losers. And in hindsight, it is, right? But to do it forward is a much more difficult task. And I think you have to believe in the space, and I think you have to make sure that you pick the companies that are representative of the space, and stick it out. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you.